Afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy you could join us today. This presentation is really targeted directly toward special education directors. I first want to emphasize that this is about process. This isn't about content. The reason I created this presentation is because when I first became the director of special education years ago, and I needed to submit our data every, December, every July, I made a lot of errors. And there was really no massive training for the intricacies on how to submit the data, how to take a large system and make sure your data is accurate. So I made a lot of errors. And I made a lot of mistakes and had to do a lot of correction and was in a little bit backward situation of our data reporting, where I was doing a lot of repair at the end of the collection, opposed to putting some work on the front end of the process to make the collection a little bit more easier. So I created this presentation as an effort to support directors on my lessons learned, to try to help you with a very daunting job that's on top of an already very busy, complex, daunting job. One disclaimer is that when we submit our data wants to be, you want the data to be accurate, and the data should represent what is on your documents. So when I go through this presentation and I say, this is a time you need to go back and correct the data, what I mean is you need to make sure it reflects accurately what services you're providing to students. And that's all I mean by it. I would never expect anybody to change data in any way. It's just a matter of making sure that your paperwork reflects the services that the students receive, and that's what you report to the state every year. Okay, so this presentation is broken up into a couple sections. There's the preventative ways. There's are things that you should do now or can do now to just make the whole process easier for you. Then I will present before collection processes you should do, during collection processes, and then after your collection, meaning extracting from your data system. It will make a lot more sense as I go through this. Even if you're an experienced director, you might learn some helpful hints through this that you didn't know about. And if you have helpful hints after my presentation, please share, because we certainly can all work together to complete this daunting task, make it easier on everyone. The first thing that you could do or should do to be able to make this process easier is to have a basic understanding of Excel, Microsoft Excel. You can watch videos on YouTube, you can talk to your data people, you can talk to some of your math teachers if you have no background on Excel, but I'm going to show you some basic tricks of using Excel to try to make the process easier. So gaining that understanding of how Excel works will help you in the long run to make this process easier. Another preventative measure thing that you should do is really become close friends with your data manager within your district and your PIMS data manager within your district, so that everybody is working together. Your special ed data manager and your PIMS manager, they might be the same person within your district, or they might be two different people. So you're going to want to make sure that you're aware of them, you work together with them, and that you have them on speed dial. You also want to know who your IU special education data manager is. You definitely want to know who they are. You want to have their telephone number handy, and you want to make sure that you are working collaboratively with them through the process. The directors have the programmatic knowledge. We understand what is supposed to be happening. We know how services are to be delivered. We know how it breaks apart across the district, but your data managers only know that. It's numbers, it's patterns, it's input. They don't understand any of what that data means and how it should fit together, so they could never find an error the way that you can find an error, and vice versa. You'll understand the programmatic pieces and how it's supposed to fit together, but you may not know the back end of it and how all those other pieces should fit together. And that's why the special education data manager, the IU data manager, and your PIMS manager, you all need to work together for a comprehensive, cohesive submission. The next thing you're going to want to know is have a basic understanding of all of the data points that are being collected and where they pull from your documents. So if you have the transition plan, the transition information that's being pulled, know where in your document it pulls from so that you know how to train your staff on where to make sure everything is accurate. The Special Education Data Summit that occurs in the spring has a session called Special Education 101. This is a great preliminary session, beginning level session for directors to attend, for the special education data managers to attend, or the PIMS managers to attend, to get a comprehensive view of all of those collection points. I won't talk in depth about them today, maybe a little bit, but that's a better training to have an idea about all of the various collection points and where they might line up on your documents or your data management system. The other error I made was that I waited till the reporting season to run my first collections. I waited to the last minute early on because the job was very busy. You spend multiple hours in meetings, multiple hours in classrooms. So to really have some undivided time to sit and do the data collection, I really just procrastinated, and that actually added to my workload in the long run. So another preventative measure throughout the year is I started running my data reports every month. And by running it every month, I was able to see errors that would surface early on. So I was able to see either who was making the errors and go back to that teacher or that speech and language therapist who was creating the document to remedy on the, early on. Or I could see that there could be a data extraction error in the coding, and I could go to my data person and say, hey, something's not going right. Can you correct this? And I could do it when there was maybe just a handful, and it allowed me to be preventative and correct it on the front end, opposed to waiting till the end of the year and extracting it once and seeing multiple red errors that I would have to play detective when I didn't have that amount of time to go back and do the correction. So running your reports every month allows you to be more effective and efficient along the way. The next thing I did is I set the conditions for the ease of reporting, and I limited the activity in the data pull. So what that means is we had a data management system, which is the same place that the documents were created, the IEPs, the RERs, the NOREPs. So anytime somebody was in one of the documents and I would extract the information from that system, the special education system, if the document was open or somebody was working within it, it would mess up that particular collection of that particular student. So what I ended up doing is I set some conditions. I would extract my report during the time that many people I know would not be in the system to try to get as clean of a report as possible. And eventually I set conditions of the year of when the documents would be created. I'm not recommending this for every school district. I will let you know that I did it in all three of my school districts, and it really helped. What I did is I indicated that IEPs prior to December 1 needed to be done early, so that during the month of December, I didn't have many IEPs or many documents that were open. So it stayed in compliance because we just pushed the due date up earlier and it was done sooner. And I did the very same practice at the end of the school year in May, so that by May 1st, we had IEPs shifted and had to be done before that. The very first year that we did that was challenging. There was quite a bit of pushback from the staff because it really sandwiched them in to get the timing straight. Once we made the transition and it became just the habit of the system, they loved it, because what that meant is over the December Christmas time, they didn't have many IEP meetings to have. They could really just focus on everything that they need to focus on during that really hectic time of year. And that held true for the May date as well. By shifting the due dates to be done before May 1st, it allowed, particularly at the secondary level, for teachers to really work on that end of the year priorities that can be very comprehensive when you're also trying to do IEPs at the same time. So I'm not saying that would work for everybody. It's just one example, but what I would recommend is you really look at your conditions and when you're pulling your report to limit the amount of people that are in it. The next thing that I did is I created a comparison document for every year, and this will come in handy later. Jeff, I just want to make sure that the Excel spreadsheet came up.
It sure did. You're good to go.
Okay, thank you. So what this is an example of right now is the raw data of students with disabilities across Pennsylvania for a 5-year sequence. So, you know, just basically looking at this, I can see the trends in regular education. I can see the trends in special education. So special education is increasing. I can look at trends within percentages, and I can look at raw counts of disability students that are eligible by disability category. You'll see later in my presentation, I have this exact same chart as a percentage. What this allowed me to do is it let me know the ballpark of my district, and it let me know the trends. It allowed me to be preventative if I needed to be preventative, if I saw something starting to go a trend I didn't want it to go in. And it also allowed me to surface errors, that if I were to run this in December and I saw something totally outside the norm as I added the new year data, it would let me know, oh my goodness, I need to go back and look at this collection in this area. What happened? Was a coding wrong? Are speech and language therapists or are certain teachers having a hard time putting the right data in? It just allows you to have a broad range process of, you know, where your numbers should be aligned to see if there is some form of anomaly in your data for that particular year. So those are some of the things that I just got into habits of doing prior to each collection year that just allowed things to run a little bit more smoother over the years. Now, again, I can't emphasize enough the partnership you need to have with your internal district data people and your external IU data people. I would have Jody and Dan's telephone number on my phone for speed dial, as well as my data team, because I know that you're constantly running, you're constantly going to this meeting, and in the middle of the meeting, you're being disrupted because there might have been a discipline situation, or there might have been a classroom you needed to go provide some support immediately. And I didn't want to show up at my desk when I had a 30-minute window of time to do something and spend 10 minutes trying to find their telephone number if I needed to make a call. So I just put their telephone numbers, their anything I needed to contact them directly on my phone. So it was a lot easier, and I didn't waste any time knowing that the time is, you know, very tight for us. So now I'm going to get into things to do prior to collection. So when I say collection, I mean prior to extracting your data from your system, whether it is IEP Writer, why it's IEP Plus, whether it's Sapphire, whatever system that you are using, these are things you should do before you extract them. So I would always have a code sheet, and I'm going to advance my slide to show you this code sheet. So I'd always have this code sheet, which will be available to you in the PowerPoint, which will be posted, and I had it right at my desk. And the reason I had it at my desk is as I go through this process, you'll see how I use these code sheets. But because as a director, you work in words, you work in the disability categories, the educational environment, the reasons for exiting, we work in words. But the data world works in numbers. And I could never remember what number code related to each particular word when I had to do corrections. And when you extract your report, you will just get numbers. You don't get many words at all. And when you get your comparison report from the IU, again, it comes in numbers. So it was very hard to always remember. So having the chart right at my desk allowed me to use some of my tools that I'm going to show you and have the information available for me to see at any moment. Again, just time saving and efficiency. And I already mentioned this about having the IU data manager and the BSC data manager numbers right on your desk area. As you get closer to collection, so probably in like November, maybe end of October, after students settle into the district, you get case managers settled due to all the mobility of your students, with students moving in, moving out, or changing case managers. So maybe the end of October, I would begin to run weekly checks. So I'd start pulling my data maybe every Monday morning, and just start looking for the errors in case something surfaces. I can correct one or two, opposed to correcting a whole bunch of data, as would happen if I waited an entire year. The other thing I would do in September is I would meet with the district data manager, the person I would need to depend on to pull my extract, the person that would be submitting it to the IU data manager, and the person that would be submitting it to the state, whatever process you use. And we would take our calendars and we would block off the time we needed to meet. So until we got more efficient with the process, I would block off maybe an hour a week starting in September. And then as I would get closer, I might block off a little bit more time. Again, I would always pick time that I would try to pick time where there wouldn't be students in the buildings, because we know how unpredictable that time can be. So maybe 7:30 to 8:30 once a week, we had time on our calendar. We touched base. If there wasn't a need to touch base, we got an extra hour, but we weren't in the heat of the year trying to schedule a joint meeting, which we know how difficult that can be. I then would look at the district calendar, and I would schedule the time that I was going to extract the report. I would schedule the sequence of when I wanted things to happen, when I wanted the first extraction, when I wanted the corrections from the teachers, and so on. And I'd work around the holiday break just to be respectful of everybody's time, to be preventative, that there wasn't a reason that I would need to bother anybody, any clerical support staff, any supervisor during a holiday break. So I just was trying to be mindful and schedule accordingly. The next bullet is exactly what I would just say. I would run that calendar by the LEA data manager so that we were all on the same page about when we would be pulling the data to make sure it meets with the district needs. Prior to collection, I would be aware of all the potential spot checker errors that are out there, and I would be knowledgeable about how to correct them. I will show you some things at the end of this presentation of the most prevalent errors. Sometimes when you get that information back, there's a lot of language on what the error is, and if you really break it down, it's one small field. So I have a couple of those examples at the back, but really being aware of what all of the codes that you're going to get back mean will help you know how to correct it and be preventative at the end. Okay, so during collection, again, when you're getting ready to collect, arrange the system, arrange the time that you're going to collect it. Inform your staff that you're collecting during this time period. I locked the system. So I would pull maybe 7 a.m. or very late at night, or ask my data person to pull outside of the work hours. And I would just lock the system so that nobody else could get into it until I felt like I had a good solid first pull of data. Once I got the data, was the most challenging part, and it is still a very challenging part. Most districts have two different systems. They have a student information system, the SIS system, and then they have a special education management system, whether it's IEP Writer or IEP Plus or some other system. And it's so important that that information matches. And the complexity of making sure those two systems match, it's immense, because each has their own data fields and each has their own people entering the data. And I don't know about your system, but particularly in Lancaster, which tends to be a little bit of a larger system, you could have 300, 400 different data people putting data into the system, between your teachers, between your guidance counselors, between your clerical support staff, into all those systems. You could have multiple people putting data into the system. And when you have multiple people putting data into a system, it leaves a lot of room for human error. So that makes it very difficult to make sure that these two systems, these two data extractions match. So early on, and I had the best staff ever, because I can't believe they did this for me. But early on, when we had a 2,400 student extract, we would have to cross-reference by hand, matching up all the data points. I can't believe they did that, but back in the olden times, that's when we had to do it. After about 5 years of realizing how ridiculous that was, we worked on the VLOOKUP, and I'm going to show you VLOOKUP. And if you already know this Epiphany option, wonderful. If not, take a view at one of these options that you can use anytime to compare data. So for this presentation, I have a very limited amount of data fields to show you for an example. But on this page, if you look at the bottom, we're going to pretend that this tab is the Student Information System, the SIS. So I pulled this PIMS file from whatever your student information system is. The second tab is your special education data system. So IEP Writer, IEP Plus, Sapphire, whatever you use. So we have two different Excel spreadsheets, and they need to match, or you're going to get a ton of errors coming back to you. So one strategy to match these two systems up, no matter how large they are, is to use a VLOOKUP. And I'm going to demonstrate this. Now, I'm not a tech trainer. I'm not an expert. This was all beginner level survival mode to try to support my staff to do this more efficiently. If you want to become very good at VLOOKUPs, you could search on YouTube or ask your tech person or somebody that knows this process. But I'm just going to show it to you so you know it exists. This isn't going to train you on every piece of it, but it's just to let you know that there are tools out there to make this a little bit easier. So to do a VLOOKUP, you first want to click on a field where you want the data to be entered. And what I'm going to be doing is putting a code in place that tells the two sheets to talk to each other and to look for particular data on each sheet and match them up. So to do this, you click on an empty field and you go up to your formulas and you click Insert a Function. And you'll have a many choices to choose from, but you're going to choose VLOOKUP. So once you get this wizard, it helps you to do it. So we're going to go by the PA Secure ID, because you need to start with a unique number. Each field needs to have a unique number, so you know you're only looking for that particular student on the next page. So I'm going to tell the VLOOKUP to look up this number. And then I'm going to tell it, where do I want to look for this number? Well, I want to look for that exact number on this page. So I'm going to highlight it. You then hit F4 because that tells it you're only looking for a number, and it puts those little money signs around it, but ultimately that's what you're telling it. So then I'm going to pick what data do I want to look at and compare. So I'm going to compare race. So to compare race, race is in field 1, 2, 3, column 3. So I'm going to put in a 3. And I know that it's logical because it says logical. And if there's an error, you'll get something else there that says it's not logical. And then you need to put false in that area. All right. So you can see how a number 3 showed up. So we're looking at this first student number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We're going to go to this special education field, and we're going to look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And it's pulling over this 3 into this field here. So I can already see that this particular student has a discrepancy between the SIS and the special education system. Now, if I want to look at all of the students, I don't need to go back and do the entire formula again. I just need to drag the formula down, and it will copy it into every cell. So when I had 2,400 students, I was able to pull it all down, and I was able to find the errors by just matching up the 2 different sides, or the 2 different sheets. So what this tells me right now is in the first student, there's an error. Oh, and here there's another error. So I have 2 errors regarding race. So at this point, I would go and I'd figure out what is the correct error, what is the correct race of this particular student. And then I would go into the systems and I would correct the data in both systems so it would be accurate. I'm going to show you how to do this again, but we're going to match up the grade this time, just so you can see the process again. So you're going to insert a formula. You go up to formula. You choose VLOOKUP. We're going to, again, you're going to look up student ID because you need the unique number. We need to tell the process where are they looking. So we're going to look in this field here. And yep. And then you need to do F4 to just tell it's a number. And we need to tell it what column we're looking for. And remember, we're doing grade this time. So that is column 1, 2, column 2. Uh-oh, it looks like I might have an error. Let's see. Oh, no, I don't. All right. So I'm going to pull down, copy it. So now all of the grades that are on this page are right next to the field in this page. So I'm going to hide these 2 columns. So you highlight them and you go down to hide. And then I have the columns right next to each other so I can compare. And I can see right here, there's an error. And I can see right here, there's an error. Now, this is a process I did within the district just because I like to be that close to the data collection and I like to be that close to making sure it's accurate. Once I had it highlighted, I would turn it over to a clerical support staff or one of my SECs, and I would say, go in and figure out what the right data is and make sure it's corrected in the system. And that way, it would always be correct in both systems. So that's one example of how you can make sure that the data is correct in both systems. So with that particular process, as I said, I would be correcting the data in the SIS and in the special education data system. I would be making the corrections there. And then once I feel like it's clean, once I feel like those 2 are going to match, I could put it up in the sandbox for additional corrections. I would make the corrections. And once I was pretty confident that it's as clean as it can be and all those internal issues have been ironed out, I then would move my corrections into the extract. And I'll explain that in a second. So I'm going to review the process. I close down the system. I pull the extract. I start looking for errors. Once I find errors, I correct them back into the SIS and the special education management system. I put it up into the system. I pull it again. I put it up in the sandbox to look for issues. Once I feel like at that process, it was pretty clean, then I extract one more clean file, and that becomes my clean file that I start working off of. This is just a visual of the VLOOKUP. So now I have a clean file that I feel is as clean as possible. It's at this point I start looking for the patterns within the data, and I use the Excel filter system. So you click on, I'm going to open up an Excel process. And like I said, they're all numbers. And unless you understand what the numbers mean, it can be very confusing and meaningless, actually. So that's why I have all the codes next to my desk, so I can always just look at the code sheet. So it's at this point, I would do two different things. I put a filter on. So you highlight the top and you go over to sort filter and you bring down a filter. And when you put the filter on, it allows you to support, to filter out or sort for different things. So I'm going to go to the primary disability category, and I'm going to support by 2121. So as you can see, it pulls out just 2121. And if you go down to this little corner on the left side, it tells you that there's 106 2121s. Well, what does that mean? Well, I have to go back to that chart, and I can see that 2121 is autism. Well, if there are 106 students that have autism, then I know my data is pretty good. But if I can see that there's something totally out of sorts, then I know, oh goodness, I have to go back and see what's going on. I might also sort by building. So let's support by location 1001. So every school building has their own number. So within your school district, you have an AUN for your school district, and then you have a particular building number for each one of your buildings. So I'm going to sort on building 1001. And that tells me that there are 2 students with autism in that particular building. Now, if this was my building that had had some autistic support classes in it, or I knew that had a high number of students with autism, then I would know, oh my goodness, I need to go back and figure out what's going on. But if this was a building that didn't have a lot of students with autism, and I was aware of that, and I would be aware of that because I had my chart that I always could look at, then I would know, okay, this part is good, I can move on. And now I'm going to look for the patterns of a different disability category, and I would just sort them all out and look. Now, I really like data. So for me, I really enjoyed this. And if you don't enjoy this, then this is probably where you would stop. But I would also predict what my Penn data chart would look like, because I would know exactly what I was sending up to Jody to know about where it should fall. I would have an idea about my educational environment, how much it may have shifted over the year, so I could be prepared. But there's just so much you can do by using the filter system in Excel to really get embedded in your data. One more trick with Excel I'm going to show you, and it's called a pivot table. So to develop a pivot table, which is ultimately you're just going to develop a chart that looks at this data in a different way, you would click on Insert, and right over here you have the option of Pivot Table. Click on the Pivot Table, and it's giving you I'm hoping it's giving me the entire table. So it's giving me this table and I want it in a new worksheet. So I'm going to hit OK. Oh, it didn't give me it. All right, so hold up. Nope, hold up. Pivot table, and I'm going to tell it I want this whole table. So I am highlighting the cell and I'm dragging it down. You also can pretty much just click in the top corner, but I started to drag, so I'm just going to finish dragging it. There's a much easier way to do this, but there we go. So I have the table highlighted that we want to use. I'm going to put it on a new worksheet. If you hit existing worksheet, it's going to put the chart right over here, but I'm going to put it on a new worksheet. All right, so now it took me to another sheet. So you can see the data is right over here. I'm on sheet 2, and it gives you these options. So you start clicking on the data points that you want to look at. So I need to click on student ID. I'm going to click on the school number, and I'm going to click on the primary disability category. And I'm going to put the school on the row, and I'm going to put the disability category in the column. And if you can look at this right now, this at the moment has all my schools broken down, and I would know what schools these were because I would have the code right next to my desk. And it has the disability categories across the top. And again, I would know what each one of these columns are because I would have the chart at my desk. But if you look inside of here, something is obviously totally wrong with these numbers. So if you look over here in the bottom right corner, it says values, and it's telling you what it's doing to the values. So it says sum of student ID. So what it's doing is it's adding up all of the student ID numbers to give us a total. So we certainly don't want them added. We want to count. So you click on the arrow, you go to the value of field settings, you click count, and you click OK, and there you have it. You have your school buildings by the number of disabilities in each, by category in the building, that if you keep your trends over the years, you are able to go and look for an anomaly and see if there's something outstanding, something very outside of what should be from your typical reporting process to know if you have something that you need to change before you submit. So here is your prior year's data example that you would be going back and forth to compare. So this is a critical point. At this point, after you've had your clean data extraction and you're doing your comparison, if you find errors, what I did at this point is I made the correction directly on that clean Excel spreadsheet. So I didn't have to extract again, because between the first time I pulled it and by the time I had time to get to this point, multiple people were in the system and multiple people made changes. So it already would have messed up this first extraction. So I would make the error corrections manually on this Excel spreadsheet. I then would go backwards into the SIS and into the special education management system and make the same revisions there, so you know that the data was correct. So at the beginning, you're pulling your extract, you're making your corrections, then you're pulling a second extract, making your corrections. Once you pull a clean extract and you get to this level, then I would start making the corrections on the clean Excel spreadsheet manually, and then fixing it into the SIS system to make sure everything was accurate to cut down on human error. This is just a visual of the tools for the filtering options and for the pivot table. So after the collection, after you have it pulled, you have it clean, you will get a comparison report. That should come from the intermediate unit to look at a year-to-year comparison. That's where you have to put in whether you have reviewed your data, whether you have corrected your data. I can't emphasize this enough. That comes out for a reason, and the reason that you have to enter into every single field, correct, or I remember I used to get extremely frustrated that I would have to put in sometimes silly comments such as, well, more students moved this year than last year, when you had to justify why there was a discrepancy between year-to-year comparison. But the reason that we do that is because we still have situations after submission after submission, after asking LEAs to review their data for accuracy, that it gets submitted up to the feds, or it gets submitted somewhere else, or it gets submitted a year later, and the district says, I'm so sorry, last year's data was inaccurate. This is the real accurate data. So it's really important during this process that you ensure that the data is as accurate as possible. And if you set some preliminary conditions and you go through a more methodical process, the end result should not be so difficult. When you submit your file up, you'll get some reports back with some errors that need to be corrected, as well as duplicates. Duplicates is when multiple districts are reporting the same student. This most often happens when students withdraw and enter a new school district right around the 12-1 count, where districts haven't quite taken them off their rolls and they enrolled in the next district. So just so everybody is aware, wherever that student is enrolled on 12-1 is the district that reports the student. So then you'll get some error reports that'll come from PIMS. And this is just an example of some of the highest errors that we receive. And I just would like to decode it a little bit for you, because what you ultimately get is you get this left side with like number 1, special education environment, 19, 20, 21, service provider location, with all these words, when really all that's telling you is your LRE code is not matching the location code. So that means you might have a student that's out of district in a restrictive setting, but you have their code as a 19, 20, or 21. So that's what you have to go back and look at when you get this code. You have to look at your LRE code and your location code to make sure that your particular location has the ability to offer that type of placement or setting. The next area you have is student district code of enrollment validation. And then you have all these words underneath of it. And all this number 2 means is that you need a valid AUN number. So when you get this code, that means that there is not a valid AUN number in the service provider field or in the location field. So you can go to the EDNA, which is a live link. Let me see if it comes up for you. This is EDNA, and you can type in the name of schools and search, and you will come up with the particular AUN numbers that you need to ensure that you are accurate. The third error is student cannot have both GIEP and IEP. That's accurate, pretty self-explanatory. That might be when you have your PIM system and somebody codes them as having a GIEP and they're also getting a code of an IEP. We know that you can only have one, so it would be the IEP that would get the check. Number 4, ed environment, not 19, 20, 21. The percentage must be blank, means that you are using the B chart. If you're using the B chart, that means that your student is not in a regular school setting. And if they are not in a regular school setting, therefore they can't have an LRE of 19, 20, or 21. So it's telling you that you have an error in this area. So you'd want to look at your chart B and just make sure whatever is correct. And the last primary error we often get is special education, primary disability type. What that means is that your disability categories are not matching. So what is in your SIS system is saying, might say the student has visual impairment, but your special education data system has a student that might be deaf and hard of hearing. Those codes aren't matching, and you're getting an error report back from the PIMS system. Most often you can correct this before it gets to you if you have done the VLOOKUP to correct for any of the errors. Okay, so that was an awful lot of information in a very brief period of time. And again, I'm not a tech trainer. I learned most of this from being a very terrible data submitter, if that's even a word. But really, I don't want anybody to struggle more than they have to. And if this taught you a couple helpful hints, great. If you need more support, I would love to help any district to feel more comfortable with their annual data submissions, because it's really important when you think about what this data it ties to everything. It really should just be a measurement of the great work that you're doing within your district, but it ties to everything from funding, from significant disproportionality to compliance, to multiple areas. So it's just really important that it's accurate. And the more work you do on the front end, the less work it is during that data pull when you really don't have time. Like in December, you do not have time to sit down and have undivided attention on this data report. So the more you can set up before you get there, the easier it can be. So at that note, Jeff, if there are any questions, there's a couple minutes for questions.
Well, Carol, I will say we have some positive affirmations for you in the chat box, folks that are very appreciative of the information that you provided. One of the things that I would just add to what you said, it resonated with me as a former special ed director myself, is the importance of that collaborative relationship with your not only PIMS coordinator, but your tech person and even your IU contact that does your PIMS reporting. So definitely important to have all those key players and have great relationships with them, because it's so important to have good people on your team like you said you did. I'm looking at the chat, and like I said, there's just some positive feedback, not any specific questions. One of the things I also thought about while Carol was presenting and how as a special ed director, you use the specific PIMS data for other things. And I just am going to give a shameless plug to one of the things that we do here at Patton, and that's to provide special ed directors with our Special Education Pro training, which gives them, more details in terms of submitting reports for things like Act 16, APS 4010, 4011, contingency funds, all of those things. For those of you, I know there are people that I see in this room that have come to those trainings more than once, but for those of you who may be new special education leaders, I would really advise you to take part in that training. I can tell you that this coming fall, that's being offered virtually on October 20th from 8:30 to 2:30. It is not up for registration yet on the Patton website, but keep your eyes open for that, because again, a lot of the information that you need for some of these reports can be pulled straight from what Carol is telling you in terms of PIMS reporting. So kind of it dovetails right into that. Again, I am seeing, let's see, here's a question. Is the Special Education 101 session from this spring available recorded?
So it wasn't recorded from this spring, but Jody and Dan are working on recording it, and it will be posted, and I can push it out through the PAIU group when it is up and running.
Okay. And Emmeline, can you tell me which training were you referring to? The one that Carol referred to is Special Education 101. And the one that I was referring to is how to be a special education pro, proactive, responsive, and organized. And again, that would be on the Patton training calendar, probably sometime in September, being held on October 20th. Okay.
I think that data can be really scary, and sometimes, actually every time in these meetings, I don't get a lot of questions. When I am in other presentations, I get peppered with questions, but I think that data in itself can be very scary, and you just kind of have to dive in and get your hands in it. And that's one of the other reasons I just, as a director, really had my hands in it, because of the criticalness of it, but I needed to know it so I could support my staff to do it well. So I would just really recommend that don't be afraid of it, and really just try to strengthen your craft so you can strengthen your staff to do a better job of it.
Absolutely. And thank you again so much, Carol, for being here with us today. Really appreciate it. We know how busy you are in Harrisburg, and to be able to spend this much time this afternoon with our leaders, again, we really appreciate it. Just a few housekeeping items before we move on to our next breakout session. We want everybody to please keep in mind that Act 48 is being awarded to participants who attend the full afternoon on Monday, which is today, and or the full morning on Tuesday, and or the full post-conference on Tuesday afternoon. So keep in mind that you do have to attend those those three things: full afternoon today, full morning tomorrow, or full post-conference in order to get that Act 48 credit. You also, in addition, will need to complete the credit verification survey and submit session codes by the close of business this Friday, next Friday, August 6th, 2021. That survey is only to be completed once after you attend your final session of this summit. That survey will open at 3:30 on Tuesday afternoon, and I'm going to post the link to that right now in the chat. Just get there. Okay. And there you have that. The link to the credit verification survey is there for you. Again, you complete that after your last session. And then I'm going to offer the code for Carol's session. The code that you need to record is EDSR1. That's E as in Eddie, D as in Doctor, S as in Sam, R as in Rabbit, and the number 1. And I will again put that in the chat right now for you. That's EDSR1. At this point, we're going to go ahead and let folks go, get ready to attend their next session if they're going to. And we want to thank everybody for being here and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks, everyone.